5 years ago, my entire world shattered in one afternoon. My name is Ava, and back then, I was 28 years old. I'd been married to Leo for 4 years, though our relationship stretched back much longer. We'd been childhood sweethearts, tied together by the friendship of our families. Everyone thought we were a perfect match, but reality rarely lives up to appearances. That day, I couldn't ignore my gut feeling any longer. For months, something had felt off, like an invisible thread unraveling the fabric of my marriage. Leo had been distant, secretive with his phone, and staying late at work far too often. I needed answers, and unfortunately, I knew where to find them. While he was in the shower, I picked up his phone and unlocked it. My hands shook as I scrolled through his messages, and there it was. Undeniable proof of his affair. Dozens of messages between him and Emma, his office receptionist. Reading their exchanges, I felt my heart drop to the floor. The words were like sharp needles puncturing my belief in everything we'd built. I couldn't cry. My mind went into autopilot as I packed a small bag with whatever essentials I could grab. My first instinct was to flee, to go to the one place that should have been my safe haven, my parents' house. I grabbed my car keys, barely able to see the road through my blurred vision as I drove away from what used to be my home. As I pulled up to my parents' house, I felt a brief flicker of hope. My mom and dad would take me in, no questions asked. I needed them now more than ever. But when I knocked on the door, it was like a cruel twist of fate was waiting for me. My mother, Elaine, opened the door, her face carefully blank. My father, Robert, stood just behind her. The coldness in their eyes made me falter. "Please," I whispered, trying to hold back tears. "I just need a place to stay for a few days." But instead of opening the door wider, my mother's lips tightened. "Ava, you need to go back to Leo," she said flatly. "He's still your husband." I was stunned. "He cheated on me!" I burst out, my voice cracking. "Don't you understand? I can't go back to him." They exchanged glances and my father's jaw clenched. "We know, Ava," he said, his tone almost bored. "Leo called us. He told us everything." For a moment, I thought they were going to support me, but my father continued, "A marriage isn't destroyed by just one person. You're not blameless in this." His words felt like a slap. They knew about Leo's betrayal, and they still blamed me. My ambition, my long hours at work, my dedication to my career, all of it in their eyes had led to this. I realized then that the door in front of me wasn't just physically closed. It was symbolic of everything they refused to give me: understanding, support, love. I begged them. My knees trembled and my voice broke as I pleaded for a place to sleep, for a few days of shelter until I could figure things out. But they refused, their faces hard and immovable. "You're too focused on your career," my mother said dismissively. "Maybe if you'd given your marriage more attention, this wouldn't have happened." Their rejection solidified something cold and heavy inside me. I straightened up, wiping my eyes. "I get it now," I said quietly. "I'm on my own." I turned away, my heart fracturing, and left them standing in the doorway, unmoved by their daughter's pain. I drove to my best friend Mia's apartment, barely holding it together. When she opened the door, I crumbled into her arms, the tears finally spilling over. Mia held me tight and let me stay with her for the next few weeks. Those days were a blur of pain, paperwork, and sleepless nights. I met with a lawyer, filed for divorce, and hunted for an apartment where I could start over. Through it all, my parents never called, never checked in. The only messages I got from them were cold lectures about how I was making the biggest mistake of my life by leaving Leo. Meanwhile, kept trying to reel me back in. Apologies, promises of counseling, empty assurances that we could fix everything. I blocked his number, along with my parents. I needed a clean break from all the toxicity. When the divorce was finalized, I realized that I hadn't just lost a husband, I'd lost my parents too. But somehow, I felt lighter. My friends became my family, the ones who truly cared. As the months turned into years, I built a new life, one free from their judgment and expectations. Little did I know, 5 years later, my past would come knocking again. And this time, I wouldn't be the one left begging. The first year after the divorce was the hardest. There were days when I woke up and forgot for just a second, that my life had crumbled. The silence of my empty apartment was deafening, but I was determined to fill it with something new, something better. I threw myself into my career. Work was the one constant that never let me down, and the projects kept my mind occupied. When I wasn't at the office, I spent time with Mia and a few other close friends who never judged me for my choices. They understood the pain I was carrying and let me heal at my own pace. Slowly, things started to change. The weight on my chest became a little lighter each morning. I redecorated my apartment, making it feel like my own little sanctuary. I discovered new hobbies, yoga, painting, and hiking. Each weekend, I found solace in the quiet of nature, where the only sounds were the rustling leaves and my own breath. But as much as I tried to move forward, there were reminders of the past everywhere. Family gatherings became minefields. Whenever I saw my parents, we'd exchange cold, forced nods. They made no effort to bridge the gap, and neither did I. I was done begging for love and acceptance that clearly wasn't there. One evening, Mia convinced me to go out for dinner with a group of her friends. I wasn't thrilled about it, but she insisted that I needed a night out. The restaurant was bustling, filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses. It felt good to be surrounded by life, even if I wasn't fully ready to participate. That's when I met Charlie. He was standing by the bar talking to one of Mia's friends. Tall, with a warm smile and eyes that sparkled with curiosity, he radiated a quiet confidence. When Mia introduced us, he shook my hand firmly, his grip reassuring. "You look like someone who needs a good meal," he joked, pointing out that I'd barely touched my food. I laughed, surprised at how easily it came out. We talked about everything and nothing, and before I knew it, the night was over. He asked if he could take me out to dinner sometime, and for the first time in years, I felt a flutter of excitement. We went on our first date the following week. I soon found out that he owned the restaurant where we'd met, but it wasn't his success that drew me in. It was the way he listened, the way he made me feel seen and valued. He didn't pry into my past, didn't ask for explanations. He just accepted me as I was. Over time, we grew closer. Charlie shared stories of his own family, a loving, supportive bunch who encouraged him to follow his dreams. It was a stark contrast to what I'd known, but instead of feeling envious, I felt hopeful. Maybe this was what love was supposed to feel like. After a year of dating, I moved into Charlie's apartment. It was a big step, but it felt right. His place was cozy and warm, filled with the scent of fresh bread and coffee. It was the kind of home I'd always wanted, a place where I felt safe and loved. We'd been together for 3 years when he proposed. It wasn't some grand, orchestrated event. We were at home cooking dinner together when he turned to me, flour on his hands and a twinkle in his eyes. "Ava," he said, "I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Tears welled in my eyes, and I nodded, unable to speak. It was simple, genuine, and perfect, just like us. I announced our engagement on social media a few days later, sharing a photo of the two of us smiling in our kitchen. I didn't think much of it at the time. My life was finally moving forward, and I wanted to celebrate it. But the past has a way of sneaking back in when you least expect it. 3 days after the post, an email popped into my inbox. The sender's name made my stomach drop. My mother. The subject line was bland, "Congratulations," but I knew there was more beneath the surface. I hesitated before opening it. Part of me wanted to delete it without a second thought, but curiosity won out. The message was short, filled with half-hearted apologies and empty words. They claimed they regretted their behavior, that they wanted to make amends and be part of my wedding. It was all so convenient. After 5 years of silence, they suddenly decided to care? No, it wasn't me they cared about. It was Charlie, or more accurately, his family and their wealth. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The wounds were still too deep, and I wasn't ready to let them back in. But true to form, my parents weren't done yet. A few days later, another email arrived. This one was less subtle. They gushed about Charlie's family, the business legacy he came from, and how proud they were that I was finally making something of myself by marrying into such a prestigious lineage. It made my skin crawl. They didn't care about my happiness. They cared about status, appearances, and what they could gain. I blocked their email addresses, my heart pounding with anger and hurt. Charlie found me sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my laptop with clenched fists. He didn't need to ask what had happened. He just wrapped his arms around me and let me lean into his strength. "I'm here," he whispered. "You don't need them." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. After I blocked my parents' emails, I hoped that was the end of it. I didn't want to think about them or their sudden interest in my life. For years, they had stayed away, and I was fine with that. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their fake apologies. I had Charlie, my friends, and the new life I'd built with my own strength. But the universe has a strange way of testing your resolve. It was a chilly evening, the sun slipping below the horizon in a wash of soft oranges and purples. Charlie and I were curled up on the couch, half watching a movie while he absent-mindedly played with my fingers. The peacefulness was so complete that I almost forgot the turmoil of the past week. Then the doorbell rang. We exchanged a puzzled glance. I wasn't expecting anyone, and neither was he. Charlie got up and opened the door while I followed close behind. The moment he pulled it open, my stomach knotted so tightly I thought I might be sick. Standing there were my parents. My mother's face was lined with worry, her eyes darting nervously to mine. My father stood rigid, his mouth a firm line. Their presence sucked the warmth out of the room, replaced with a cold dread that seeped into my bones. Charlie's hand found mine immediately. His fingers tightened around mine, a silent reminder that I wasn't alone. "What are you doing here?" My voice was quiet, but the edge was unmistakable. My mother cleared her throat, trying to smile. It wobbled and failed. "Ava, we just wanted to talk. Please." I didn't move. The door felt like a barrier between my old life and my new one. Charlie didn't let go of my hand, and his steady presence gave me the strength to stay rooted. I took a deep breath. "Talk about what? How did you ignore me for 5 years? How did you only decide to care because you found out I'm marrying someone who comes from money?" "Ava, that's not fair," my father began, but I cut him off. "No. What's not fair is being left out in the cold by your own parents when you needed them the most." My mother's eyes welled with tears. "We made mistakes. We know that now." I shook my head, disbelief bubbling up. "You knew what Leo did to me. You knew, and you still chose his side. You shut the door in my face when I was broken and desperate. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice." My father's jaw tightened, and his eyes flashed with something close to anger. "You're being stubborn, Ava. We're here, aren't we? We're trying to make amends." I felt my pulse quicken. Charlie sensed it too, his thumb brushing gently over my knuckles. His voice was calm but firm as he spoke. "Ava doesn't owe you anything. You don't get to show up now and demand forgiveness just because it suits you." My father's face darkened. "You need to watch out for that attitude of hers. It's the reason her first marriage failed. Don't think you're immune to it." His words were like poison, seeping into the air between us. I took a step back, my breath catching. The sheer audacity of it stunned me. Even after all these years, they still blamed me for everything. Charlie didn't hesitate. His voice was cold and sharp. "I don't take advice from people who turned their backs on their own daughter. Ava's attitude isn't the problem. You are." My father's face flushed with anger. My mother's eyes darted nervously between us, her hands twisting together. "Please, Ava," she whispered. "We just want to be part of your life again." I shook my head slowly. "You want to be part of my life now because it looks good. Because I'm marrying someone successful. But where were you when I was broken? When I had nothing?" They didn't have an answer. Silence settled between us, thick and suffocating. "I think you should leave," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "I don't want you here. Not now. Not like this." My mother's face crumpled, and for a brief moment I saw genuine sorrow in her eyes. But it wasn't enough to change the past. My father scowled, his pride too big to let him soften. He muttered something under his breath and turned away. I watched them walk back to their car, their figures fading into the dim evening. When the door clicked shut, I felt the weight of years lift just a little. My knees wobbled and Charlie pulled me into his arms. "You did the right thing," he whispered. I nodded against his chest, the tears finally coming. They weren't tears of sadness, not entirely. They were tears of relief, of finality. The chapter with my parents wasn't closed completely, but at least I knew where I stood that night. I held Charlie a little tighter. For the first time, I realized that family wasn't always about blood. It was about the people who stood by you, no matter what. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I wouldn't be walking into it alone. After that confrontation with my parents, a strange sense of peace settled over me. It wasn't complete closure, but it was close enough. I finally understood that their desire to reconnect wasn't about love or regret, it was about appearances. And I didn't need that kind of poison in my life anymore. Charlie held me that night as I let go of the last threads of hope that my parents would ever truly change. Their actions had spoken louder than any apology ever could. I wasn't sad. I was relieved. Relieved that I didn't have to keep reaching for something that was never there. Life went back to normal. Or at least what normal had become for me. The days were filled with work, planning the wedding, and spending evenings wrapped in Charlie's warmth. His family welcomed me like I was always meant to be there. They never made me feel like an outsider, never measured my worth by what I could offer them. It was a strange and beautiful feeling, But just when I thought the storm had passed, a new gust of wind blew the past right back into my life. It started with a phone call. Early one morning, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello? Ava?" The voice was hesitant but unmistakable. It was my grandmother, Margaret. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "Grandma?" "Yes, sweetheart, it's me." Her voice was soft, almost fragile. "I hope I didn't wake you." "No," I said quietly, trying to push down the sudden rush of emotions. I was already up. There was a pause, the kind that holds 1,000 unspoken words. "I heard what happened with your parents," she finally said. "They told me about the argument, about you turning them away." I took a deep breath, bracing myself for another lecture. "Grandma, she interrupted gently. "I'm not here to lecture you, Ava. I just want to understand." Her words caught me off guard. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Understand what?" "Why you felt you had to shut them out completely. I know they hurt you. I know they made mistakes, but they're still your parents." I closed my eyes, the ache in my chest flaring up again. "Grandma, they abandoned me when I needed them the most. They chose Leo over me. They blamed me for everything, even when I was shattered. And now they want back in, but only because they think my life is finally acceptable to them. How can I let them back in when their love comes with conditions?" She sighed, a long, weary sound. "I've tried to stay neutral all these years, Ava. But maybe that was my mistake too. Maybe I should have stood up for you when they didn't." Her words felt like a balm on an old wound. I blinked back tears. "Why didn't you?" "Because I thought if I stayed out of it, things would resolve on their own. I didn't want to choose sides." She paused. "But now I see that by staying silent, I chose their side anyway. And for that, I'm sorry. I didn't know what to say. For so long, I had felt utterly alone, thinking no one in my family saw the truth. But here was my grandmother, acknowledging her role, her silence. "I'm not asking you to forgive them," she continued. "I just don't want you to carry this anger forever. It's heavy, Ava. Too heavy for one heart." Her words hung in the air, a delicate truth that I didn't know how to hold. "I'm not ready to forgive them," I whispered. "Maybe I never will. And that's okay," she said softly. "You don't have to. Just promise me you won't let their mistakes poison your happiness." A tear slipped down my cheek. "I promise." She sighed again, but this time it felt lighter. That's all I needed to hear. "I love you, Ava. I always have. I love you too, Grandma." We said our goodbyes, and when the call ended, I sat there for a long time, staring at the sunlight filtering through the window. I felt lighter somehow, as if my grandmother's words had loosened the tight grip of the past. When Charlie woke up and found me sitting there, he pulled me close. "Everything okay?" I nodded. "Yeah, I think it might be." We spent the next few weeks focused on the wedding. Every little detail, from the flowers to the playlist, was a reflection of us. Simple, genuine, and filled with love. My friends were my family now, and Charlie's parents treated me like their own daughter. For once, I didn't feel like something was missing. Everything I needed was right in front of me. I didn't expect my parents to show up again. I thought they'd finally gotten the message. But 2 days before the wedding, they did. I was at home alone, putting together last-minute decorations, when the doorbell rang. My heart sank. I didn't need to look to know who it was. I opened the door, and there they were. My mother's eyes red and swollen, my father looking older, the pride in his posture sagging. "We're sorry, Ava," my mother said, her voice trembling. "We know we can't fix what we did. We just want to tell you we love you, even if you don't believe it." My father's eyes met mine, and for the first time, they weren't hard or cold. "We failed you," he said quietly. "And we're paying for it." I swallowed hard, my chest aching. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," I admitted. "But I hope you learn from it." They nodded, tears streaming down my mother's face. "We hope so too," she whispered. I didn't invite them to the wedding. I wasn't ready for that. But as they walked away, I felt a small piece of the weight lift. Maybe they were finally beginning to understand. Maybe not. But it wasn't my burden to carry anymore. That night, I told Charlie what happened. He didn't say much. He just held me and let me feel whatever I needed to feel. And for the first time in years, I slept without the echoes of the past haunting my dreams. The morning of the wedding was quiet. The sky was soft with pale hues of dawn, and the air held the kind of stillness that makes you feel like the world is pausing just for you. I stood by the window, watching the sunrise, feeling a strange calm settle over me. After all the storms, I was here. I was ready. Charlie was already awake, making coffee in the kitchen. We had decided to keep things simple, getting ready together, because that was who we were. No need for separation or tradition. Our wedding wasn't about show or spectacle. It was about us, about the life we were choosing to build. "Coffee?" he asked, holding out a steaming mug. I smiled, taking it. "You always know what I need." He grinned and kissed my forehead. "It's my job." As I sipped the coffee, I thought about how far I'd come. 5 years ago, I'd been standing outside a locked door, feeling like my world was ending. Now, I was standing in a home filled with warmth, love, and the promise of new beginnings. The contrast wasn't lost on me. Life has a way of breaking you down before it builds you back up, stronger and more resilient. Mia arrived a little later, her eyes shining with excitement. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, bouncing on her toes. I nodded. "More than ready." We dressed quickly, the simplicity of my white dress feeling just right. No heavy layers or elaborate designs, just light fabric that flowed with every movement. Charlie wore a soft gray suit that made his eyes stand out even more. When we looked at each other, we smiled. No words needed. Everything was exactly as it should be. The ceremony was held in a small garden, the air filled with the scent of wildflowers. Our closest friends gathered around us, forming a circle of love and support. Charlie's parents beamed with pride, and Mia gave me a wink as she took her place as my maid of honor. When we stood together in front of everyone, hands entwined, I felt a deep, unshakable peace. This was real. This was love. Our vows were simple, spoken from the heart. "I promise to stand beside you, no matter what," Charlie said, his voice steady. "To love you not just when things are easy, but when they're hard. You are my home, my heart, my everything." Tears welled in my eyes. "I promise to walk with you through every joy and every challenge, to love you for who you are and who you will become. You are the light that found me in the dark, and I will cherish you forever." As we exchanged rings, the world seemed to hold its breath. When Charlie leaned in and kissed me, the warmth of his lips washed away every shadow that had ever touched my heart. Cheers and laughter erupted around us, but all I could hear was the steady beat of my heart, echoing with hope. The reception was a blur of music, laughter, and joy. We danced under strings of lights, surrounded by the people who truly mattered. I caught glimpses of faces, Mia's radiant smile, Charlie's parents swaying together, friends laughing over glasses of champagne. For the first time in years, there was no weight on my shoulders, no ghostly whispers of the past, just life, in its purest and most beautiful form. Later in the evening, when the sky was a deep indigo and the stars sparkled like scattered diamonds, Charlie and I slipped away from the crowd. We walked hand in hand through the garden, the cool grass beneath our feet. "Are you happy?" he asked, his voice soft. I looked up at him, my heart swelling. "More than I ever thought I could be." He smiled, pulling me into his arms. "Me too." We stood there, wrapped in each other, the night wrapping around us like a protective cloak. I realized then that forgiveness didn't have to be immediate or even absolute. It was okay to hold boundaries, to protect my peace. I didn't need my parents' approval or their version of love. I had built my own life, my own family, one grounded in honesty and care. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, carrying away the last remnants of bitterness. I let it go willingly, knowing I was exactly where I was meant to be. We walked back toward the celebration, the sound of laughter and music growing louder. As we rejoined our friends and family, I knew this was only the beginning. A new chapter, one I was writing on my own terms, with a partner who loved me for every piece of who I was. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what lay ahead.